like, is it not going to make me sign in? Hey, okay, here we are, carbohydrate metabolism. This is going to be sort of part 1 and part 2, so I apologize right now. This will probably be the longest video you have to hear me ramble through, so I'll tell you when a good stopping point to maybe take a little breather might be. But carbohydrate metabolism is extremely important as we talk about aerobic metabolism. So I've showed this before, so I'm not going to go over this again, but we do have our 3 energy systems, and we are just going to focus on the third, our aerobic oxidative phosphorylation. So again, with our energy systems, with our first system being very short sprints, sort of, our medium kind of intermediate system being the glycolytic and oxidative, and then our third system really fueling that aerobic metabolism for the marathon. You can see that these first 2 systems, this energy production takes place outside of the mitochondria. So we are trying to get to this place where we can make ATP, that usable currency, that energy that we can use to fuel our muscles for activity and work. So inside the mitochondria is really where this kind of magic takes place. We have our citric acid cycle, our Krebs cycle, bring back memories from human systems phys, and our electron transport chain. And then this is what's used to generate this ATP. So again, these kind of underlying concepts might be obvious things that you've heard of before, but we're going to try to set this in the exercise world, in the exercise physiology capacity. So for carbohydrate metabolism, our bodies don't directly use energy from food. We have to convert this to ATP, again, which is that usable currency that our bodies can utilize to fuel oxygen to oxygenated muscles to carry out work so that we can take on activities. So we know that metabolism and nutrition go hand in hand, but better understanding how consumption and restrictions of certain foods can enhance or hinder physical fitness and activity and life. So carbohydrate synthesis and degradation, or simply breaking down, play a vital role in cellular function by providing the energy required for the most metabolic processes. So in simpler terms, breaking down carbs by a chemical process to provide energy. And this energy is ATP. That's what we want. And we want to provide this energy for aerobic exercise. So we are focusing on the aerobic side of things now for our carbohydrate metabolism. So there's many diverse ways to produce ATP. Again, we've talked about in the mitochondria, this is where our citric acid cycle and respiratory chain are going to take place. For the more anaerobic glycolytic processes, that will take place in the cytosol, kind of giving you some things to read on your own and to dive in a little bit deeper if you don't have a great kind of basic knowledge, or if it's been a while since you've studied these. But we're going to move on to cellular respiration. So cellular respiration kind of used interchangeably with carbohydrate metabolism, aerobic metabolism, aerobic respiration. Those are all sort of interchangeable terms that I kind of go back and forth about. So cellular respiration is a multi-step process that converts the chemical energy of food into usable cellular energy in the form of ATP. Remember, that's what our body is going to be able to use to provide energy. So ATP is this currency of cells. It's produced primarily in the mitochondria. I have to say it, the powerhouse of the cell. Mitochondria are cellular organelles that make ATP for our cells. So we can think of aerobic cellular respiration is divided into 4 stages. And this first one is really important. They're all important, but the first one is glycolysis. And so what we have here is we have glycolysis sort of here in the purple. Remember, this is taking place in the cytosol, and we do produce substrate level phosphorylation of ATP. So we have glucose and other fuel molecules that are converted to pyruvate. Now, before we can get to the citric acid cycle, we have to have a few more chemical processes occur in order to really produce a lot of usable ATP for our aerobic metabolism. So I'll sort of revert back to the schematic as we go through these next few lectures, but know that glycolysis is really the first stage in our aerobic cellular respiration. So we are in this area right here where we are converting glucose to pyruvate. And I'm really going to break this down more as we go into the next slides. But again, I like to give you a couple different visuals to really understand where we're at. So we have our citric acid cycle right here. We have our carrier proteins, NADH and FADH2. We really want to get down to the electron transport chain so that we can produce the most ATP possible. But before we get there, we really need to start off in glycolysis. So the body always tries to maintain a continuous supply of ATP through different metabolic pathways. If you remember back to the YouTube video a few modules ago of the lady that did not have any energy left to finish the marathon, and she was helped by that other wonderful person get to the finish line, and she actually won because of that, which was just remarkable kind of sportsmanship there. But she ran out of ATP. Simply, I mean, she was absolutely spent. So she has depleted all of the energy stores within her body. But within the mitochondria, we have this reactive process to use cellular energy to generate ATP aerobically, which is this cellular oxidation. So this includes the Krebs cycle, also known as the citric acid cycle, and the respiratory chain. So I'm kind of giving you some of the big picture items here and kind of throwing a lot of terms at you, but we're really going to break this down over the next few modules. So you've seen this before. We have the metabolism of glucose to glycogen and then glycogen to glucose. So after a meal, glucose does not accumulate in the blood. Rather, it either enters the pathway of energy metabolism, or it's stored as glycogen or converted as fat. So again, just a little review of something that I've showed you prior. So again, we know that carbohydrates are going to be our main substance. I'm spelling something wrong. Ooh. So our main substance in energy metabolism or aerobic metabolism. So we're going to have the metabolism of glucose is going to generate ATP through glycolysis. And this metabolism of glucose happens in the mitochondria to fuel this aerobic metabolism. So we're looking down here at our glucose, our fructose, and our galactose. So this is sort of a moneymaker slide. We have a lot to talk about here, and this is really what you're going to revert back to for quiz 2. I'm going to have you sort of draw this out in your own way. I really think that drawing this out and sort of putting in the terms and understanding what's going on is a really good way to learn this, especially if you've learned it in the past, but it's been a little bit of time. So this is a really good slide to come back to when working on quiz 2. So let's go ahead and start with, I'm going to do some different colors here. We have our carbohydrates that are going to be converted to our glucose. And we really want to get to this pyruvic acid because we can go to our lactic acid, which will then be our anaerobic or are no oxygen available. So this is like when you're doing a sprint. But there are four sort of main things to think about here. So I'm going to change colors again, trying to make this as simple as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to consume carbohydrates. They're going to be converted to glucose. Excess is going to be stored as glycogen. So I'm just sort of drawing this out in a little bit of a different way to hopefully help you understand this a little bit more. It's going to be stored as glycogen. If we don't use this storage, that will turn into fat, and that will be fat accumulated on our bodies. Think back to that first lecture of fat patterning, or do we have more of an android shape or a gynoid shape? It all kind of comes together. So if we have our consumed carbohydrates and say we actually use it for energy and we're not storing it, this can be converted from glycogen back to our glucose. So glycogenesis is going to be the storage, where glycogenolysis is going to be sort of the creation. So if levels are too low and you need energy, your body will go through the process of taking this storage and converting it back to glucose so that you can use it for aerobic metabolism if you have these low energy sources. So if we have, let's see where I want to go now. Number 1 and number 2 for our glycogenesis and our glycogenolysis, we're going to write something down here, 1 and 2. So our glycogenesis is going to be where carbs are stored until needed for energy, or it might just be converted to fat if you never use it. Number 2, our glycogenolysis if blood levels are low and you need energy, your body can convert that back to glucose to provide you energy for your aerobic metabolism. Now, there's a few more kind of arrows here. Remember, the arrows are kind of the conversion factors. And again, with quiz 2, I'm really going to kind of force you maybe a little bit out of your comfort zone to make this prettier than what I'm doing right now. To hopefully, I'm such a visual learner, I have an ability to kind of look at this and memorize it and be able to regurgitate that. But I want you guys to be able to understand it and explain it. So another thing that we'll add here too, let's label our glycolysis, let's label this number 3. And so glycolysis is going to be the breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid. Okay, so that arrow is going this way. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid. And then number 4, this gluconeogenesis. This is going to be the creation of glucose from pyruvate. So it's starting at pyruvate, and you can see that the arrow is going this way. So it's the creation of glucose from pyruvate. So it's going to transform non-carb lactate into glucose. So as you can see, we're really trying to get to glucose and this glucose 6-phosphate so that we can continue through the cascade to go into the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, and then down into the electron transport chain. So really make sure you understand glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, glycolysis, and gluconeogenesis, and how we're on either side of this equation trying to get back to glucose so that we can continue down the line in our aerobic metabolism. I wanted to just provide a non-written on copy again for maybe you to practice. Again, use this for quiz 2. I'm going to have you kind of create your own version of this, but certainly using this as a guide. We're not reinventing the wheel, but I want you to kind of come up with your own way to explain this, because this is really important, and there's a lot of words that start with G. It's really confusing. So hopefully this has helped. So here is our metabolism summary, and we are hanging out. We just discussed this green portion right here. So in our carbohydrate metabolism, our aerobic metabolism, again, we're trying to get to this glucose to then get to pyruvic acid, which will then generate acetyl-CoA, which will be our entry into the Krebs cycle, and then to the electron transport chain, where we are going to produce so much ATP for our body to be able to use. So I'm going to revert back to this schematic often throughout this unit, and we've already broken down this first part, and so we're going to do that for every single part on this schematic. So stay tuned for more fun. Again, this is what we have sort of gone over, this metabolism of glucose to glycogen, and then our glycogen to glucose. And so I'm going to sort of leave this here for you to, again, revisit whenever you do quiz 2 to really help you understand the difference between these terms and sort of what is going on here. So another different way to look at this is our carbohydrate metabolism that we know begins with the digestion into the small intestine of our monosaccharides that are then absorbed into the bloodstream. And so what we have here is we have a breakdown of carbohydrates. We have either our glycolysis, which will go into our anaerobic metabolism, or our aerobic. So whether we're doing those short duration sprints or some of those longer efforts like the marathon. So again, we have our glucose molecule, and there are several ways to get to that glucose via this schematic. But again, our whole goal is to generate this ATP so that we have this energy currency to fuel our muscles. So remember, if no oxygen is present, we know that that's anaerobic. You've done sort of a shorter sprint effort. And then if there is oxygen present, we know that that is aerobic metabolism. So that's when we can go to the Krebs cycle and then the electron transport chain to really produce ATP. Remember how we said that there are diverse ways to produce ATP, and that's exactly sort of what I'm taking you through right now. So another way to look at this is when we have oxygen, let's start up here on the left-hand side. This is aerobic metabolism, and that's outlined in blue. So we have converted glucose to glycolysis into pyruvic acid, then Krebs cycle, then electron transport chain. If no oxygen is present, that means we are in our anaerobic state where we produce lactic acid. So this is just another visual that is the same as this, but just kind of organized a little bit differently. So kind of latch on to the one that makes the most sense in your head, but remembering that there's a fork in the road. So this happens following glycolysis. So the presence or absence of oxygen really decides, are we going into the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, or are we stopping with this lactic acid formation because we don't have any oxygen? So these are important concepts to sort of remember as we go through. I have showed you that. Again, I'm leaving this here for you to fill out on your own as you're going through and studying. Essentially, what I have right here is just a blank canvas for you to fill in what's going on with the green. Again, we'll kind of revert back to this for quiz 2, but I've left this here in case you're an individual that really likes to check your understanding and maybe do this blindly, if you will, to really understand what's going on with our carbohydrate and aerobic metabolism. Okay, so we are up to our carbohydrate metabolism part 2. If you need to take a break, pause me if you haven't already paused me 50 times by this point. But we're going to go ahead and continue into part 2. So for this pyruvate oxidation, this second stage of our aerobic metabolism, we have gotten to this pyruvic acid state. So our pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule. As you can see here, carbon, carbon, carbon. So it's a 3-carbon molecule that we are trying to break down and get to acetyl-CoA. So we have the oxidation of pyruvate, which means we have energy loss in the form of electrons to convert to acetyl-CoA. So during the breakdown of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, electrons are transferred from NAD to NADH, which are carrier proteins. And this is how we are going to get through the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain to this reusable ATP. So kind of just giving you a quick breakdown of what's going on with the formation of our NADH and our NAD+. So pyruvate oxidation is our second stage. So we just discussed glycolysis. Now we are talking about pyruvate oxidation. We want to convert to acetyl-CoA so that we can continue into the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain to produce all of this ATP. Okay, so this aerobic production of ATP, as we've discussed, occurs inside the mitochondria. And we know that these mitochondria are these cellular organelles that make ATP for our cells. So it involves the interaction of 2 cooperating metabolic pathways, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. And we'll discuss those in our next lectures as we get through our aerobic metabolism. I'm going to save these for the start of our Krebs cycle and the primary function for the next one. I want to strictly sort of leave this for our carbohydrate metabolism 1 and 2, and we're going to save the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain because I have some fun worksheets and better ways to explain this. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.